What would you do if your orders were to destroy a village? Women, children, elderly. Because intelligence said German soldiers were hiding there. Would you pull the trigger, or would you risk everything to find another way? In March 1945, American tank commander Captain James Bauer stood at the edge of a small French village called Cernay, 70 miles from the German border. His radio crackled with orders from headquarters. "Level the town," enemy presence confirmed. "Artillery strike authorized." Behind him, 6 Sherman tanks, cannons loaded. Ahead, stone buildings where families huddled in cellars, praying the war would pass them by. Intelligence said SS troops were using the village as a stronghold. Command said civilian casualties were acceptable. But Captain Bauer saw something in his binoculars that made him freeze. A white sheet hanging from a church window. Not a surrender flag, a plea, and in that moment, James Bauer made a decision that would either save hundreds of lives or end his military career in a court-martial. If you want to know how one man's disobedience became the difference between massacre and miracle, subscribe now. This is the true story of the tank commander who said no. James Michael Bauer was born on April 3, 1920, in a small farming town in Iowa, into a family that had lost everything in the Depression. His father was a World War I veteran who never spoke about France except to say, "War turns men into something they can't recognize in the mirror." James grew up watching his father wake screaming from nightmares, watched him drink to forget things he could never explain. When Pearl Harbor was attacked in 1941, James was 21, working at his uncle's hardware store, engaged to a schoolteacher named Elizabeth. He didn't want to enlist. He'd seen what war did to his father. But every man in town was volunteering. And the pressure, the posters, the speeches, the looks from neighbors, made staying home feel like cowardice. So James enlisted in the army, trained at Fort Knox as a tank commander, and shipped out to England in 1943. They gave him a Sherman tank, 30 tons of steel with a 75mm cannon and armor that German panzers could punch through like paper. They made him responsible for 4 men crammed inside that metal coffin, and they sent him to France on D-Day +30, June 1944, to punch through German lines. James learned quickly that tank warfare wasn't glory, it was horror. He watched Shermans brew up into fireballs when hit, crews screaming as they burned alive. He rolled over German positions and felt bodies crunch under treads. He shelled villages because command said they were enemy strongholds, and later walked through the rubble finding dead civilians who'd never had a chance to evacuate. By March 1945, Captain James Bauer had been promoted twice for bravery under fire. He'd destroyed 17 German tanks. He'd led his platoon through Belgium and into eastern France. His crew loved him because he kept them alive through impossible odds. But every night James wrote letters to Elizabeth that he never sent. Letters that said, "I don't know who I'm becoming. I follow orders that kill people and I'm good at it. And that terrifies me." Then came the morning of March 12, 1945, when his radio crackled with orders to destroy the village of Cernay, and James Bauer had to decide who he really was. Cernay was a nothing village. 200 people, maybe less. Stone farmhouses clustered around a medieval church with a bell tower. Orchards, a single dirt road. It sat in a valley between American and German lines. Disputed territory that had changed hands 3 times in 2 weeks. Intelligence reported that a squad of SS troops had occupied the village, using civilians as human shields while they prepared ambushes. Captain Bauer received the orders at dawn. Proceed to grid coordinates 47.3 N, 5.8 E. Destroy all structures. Weapons free. Civilian evacuation not feasible due to enemy presence. James read the orders twice. Destroy all structures. That was code for, we don't care who's inside. His second-in-command, Lieutenant Danny Morrison, a kid from Boston who still believed war had rules, looked at him. "Captain, that's a civilian target. Intelligence says SS troops are fortified there." James replied, his voice flat. "High Command wants it leveled before we push east." Artillery's standing by, but James hesitated. Something didn't sit right. SS troops didn't hole up in villages. They used them as staging areas and moved on. And if they were really fortified, why hadn't they engaged American patrols? The whole situation felt wrong. At 0800 hours, James's platoon, 6 Sherman tanks, rolled into position on the ridge overlooking Cernay. Through his binoculars, James studied the village. No movement. No defensive positions, no machine gun nests, just quiet stone buildings and, hanging from the church bell tower, a white bedsheet. Not a flag of surrender, just a sheet. But James knew what it meant. Please don't kill us. His radio crackled. Bauer, this is fire control. We have artillery ranging on your target. Give the word and we'll flatten it. You have 10 minutes to confirm no friendly presence. 10 minutes. James scanned the village again. If SS troops were there, approaching on foot would be suicide. If they weren't, calling in artillery would murder 200 people. Lieutenant Morrison's voice was quiet. Captain, what do we do? James lowered his binoculars, his jaw clenched. Every instinct said those orders were wrong, but disobeying a direct order in wartime was treason, court-martial, possibly execution. Hold position, James said. I'm going in on foot. Morrison grabbed James's arm. Captain, you can't. If there are SS in there, you'll be dead before you take 10 steps. Then you'll know to call in the strike, James said, unbuckling his sidearm holster. He climbed out of the tank, boots hitting French soil, and started walking down the ridge toward Cernay, 300 yards. Open ground. If German snipers were positioned in those buildings, James was a perfect target. His heart hammered against his ribs. Every step felt like the last one he'd ever take. Behind him, he heard Morrison arguing on the radio with fire control, buying him time. 200 yards. James could see details now. Broken shutters, a bicycle lying in the road, laundry still hanging on lines. No signs of military occupation. No fortifications 100 yards. The village remained silent. Too silent. James's hand instinctively moved toward his pistol, then stopped. If he approached armed, anyone watching might shoot first. So he raised both hands above his head, palms open, and kept walking. 50 yards. The church door opened. James froze, expecting gunfire. Instead, an old man emerged, maybe 70, wearing a priest's collar, walking with a cane. Behind him, a woman, then children, then more villagers, maybe 30 people, all stepping cautiously into the street. The priest spoke in broken English. American? You are American? James nodded, lowering his hands slowly. Captain James Bauer, U.S. Army. Are there German soldiers here? The priest shook his head violently. No Germans. They left 2 days ago. Took all young men with them, forced labor. Only old people, women, children remain. We heard tanks. We thought, his voice broke. We thought you would shell us. James felt his stomach drop. Intelligence was wrong. There were no SS troops. No fortifications. Just terrified civilians who'd already survived 3 years of Nazi occupation and now faced annihilation from their supposed liberators. His radio crackled. Fire control impatient. Bauer confirmed target status. We're ready to fire. James looked at the priest, at the children clutching their mothers, at the village that intelligence had condemned to death. He raised his radio and made the most important decision of his life. Negative. Target is civilian occupied. No enemy presence. I'm aborting the strike. The voice came back immediately, cold and furious. Bauer, you don't have that authority. The radio voice belonged to Major Hackett, Battalion Fire Control Officer, a by-the-book commander who'd never walked through a bombed village counting bodies. Captain Bauer, intelligence confirms enemy presence. Your orders are to clear the area and authorize the strike. Immediately. James looked at the priest, at the villagers gathering behind him, at children who'd already lived through more horror than any child should. He thought about his father's nightmares, about the letters he couldn't send to Elizabeth, about the man he saw in the mirror every morning who he barely recognized anymore. Sir, I'm standing in the village square. There are no German soldiers here, only civilians. Firing on this position would be a war crime. Silence. Then, Captain, you are relieving yourself of command if you refuse this order. Do you understand what you're doing? James did. Court-martial, dishonorable discharge, possibly prison. But he also understood that following this order meant murdering 200 innocent people to satisfy intelligence that was provably wrong. I understand, sir. But I'm not authorizing this strike. Then you're under arrest, Bauer. Hold your position. MPs are en route. The radio went dead. Morrison's voice crackled through James's headset. "Captain, the rest of the platoon is with you. Whatever happens, we're with you." James felt something break inside his chest. Not fear, but relief. He wasn't alone in this. The priest gripped James's arm. "You saved us. We will tell everyone. The Americans saved Cernay." But James knew the truth was more complicated. He'd disobeyed orders, broken the chain of command, and now he'd face the consequences. Then a sound that made everyone freeze: diesel engines. Heavy vehicles approaching from the east. The villagers scattered, terrified. James raised his binoculars. German tanks. 3 Panzer IVs emerging from the tree line half a mile away, heading straight for the village. The intelligence hadn't been entirely wrong. There were Germans in the area, just not where command thought they were. And now, those tanks were rolling toward a defenseless village full of civilians and one American captain who'd just gambled everything on his conscience. Morrison's panicked voice. "Captain." "Orders?" James grabbed his radio. "All tanks, combat positions. We hold this village. Nobody gets through." James had 6 Sherman tanks against 3 German panzers. In a fair fight, the Americans would lose. Panzer armor was thicker, their 75-meter guns more powerful. But this wasn't a fair fight. James had the high ground, the element of surprise, and something the Germans didn't. A reason to fight that had nothing to do with orders. "Morrison, take left flank." "Jenkins right. We bracket them in a crossfire. Wait for my signal." The villagers were running for the church cellars, the priest herding them like sheep. James prayed the stone walls would hold if this went bad. The German tanks rolled into the valley, cautious, scanning for threats. They hadn't spotted the American position yet. James tracked the lead panzer through his gun sight, waiting. Fire! 6 Shermans opened up simultaneously. The lead panzer exploded, turret spinning into the air. The second tank tried to reverse but caught 2 shells in the side armor, brewing up into flames. The third panzer, realizing the trap, spun toward cover, its cannon swinging toward Morrison's tank. "Morrison, move!" "Move," the panzer fired. The shell screamed past Morrison's Sherman, missing by inches, slamming into a stone wall behind him. Morrison returned fire, his shell ricocheting off the panzer's frontal armor. "Flank him," James shouted. "He can't turn fast enough." 2 Shermans maneuvered left while the panzer tried to track them, but James was already firing. His shell hit the panzer's tread, immobilizing it. Morrison's second shot punched through the side armor. The German tank stopped moving. Silence. Smoke drifted across the valley. 3 burning panzers. 0 American losses. James's crew erupted in cheers, but James felt no victory, just exhaustion and dread. He'd won the battle, but he'd still disobeyed orders. And now MPs were coming to arrest him. Then Morrison's voice, urgent. "Captain, we've got more company. American convoy half a mile out. It's Colonel Dressler." James's blood went cold. Colonel Raymond Dressler, 3rd Army, the man who'd approved the original strike order. The man who now had every reason to see James court-martialed for insubordination. The convoy rolled into Cernay, and James Bauer prepared to face the end of his military career. Colonel Raymond Dressler climbed out of his jeep and surveyed the scene. 3 burning German tanks, a French village still standing, and Captain James Bauer standing at attention. Waiting for judgment, Dressler was a career officer, 48 years old, West Point. A man who believed the military ran on discipline, and discipline meant following orders without question. He walked past the destroyed panzers, past Morrison's Sherman still smoking from near-miss damage, and stopped directly in front of James. "Captain Bauer," Dressler said, his voice hard as granite, "you disobeyed a direct order from Battalion Fire Control. You refused to authorize an artillery strike on a confirmed enemy position. Do you have anything to say?" James met his eyes. "Sir, the intelligence was wrong. There were no enemy combatants in this village, only civilians. I verified this personally before refusing the order." "You verified it by walking into potential enemy territory alone, without authorization, risking your life and compromising your unit's position." "Yes, sir," Dressler's jaw tightened. "And then you engaged 3 German tanks without requesting armored support or air cover. The tanks were approaching the village, sir." "There wasn't time." "There wasn't time," Dressler repeated coldly. "Captain, Do you understand that what you did today constitutes insubordination, reckless endangerment, and violation of the chain of command? Any one of those charges is sufficient for court-martial. James said nothing. There was nothing to say. He'd known the consequences when he made his choice. Then the priest appeared, limping toward them on his cane, followed by dozens of villagers. They gathered around the American officers, and the priest spoke in trembling French, which Dressler's translator converted. "This man saved our lives. We were told to hide in our cellars and pray. We heard your planes, your artillery. We were certain we would die. But this captain, he came alone, unarmed, and he stopped it. Then he fought the Germans to protect us. He is a hero." More villagers came forward, speaking rapidly, showing Dressler their children, their elderly, the 200 people who would have been vaporized by American artillery if James Bauer had followed orders. Dressler listened in silence. Then he turned to James. "Captain, walk with me." They moved away from the crowd toward the ridge where James's tanks were positioned. Dressler stood there for a long moment, looking down at the village. "I approve that strike order," Dressler said quietly, "based on intelligence that 6 SS troops were fortified in Cernay. I authorized the destruction of this village because I believed it would save American lives down the road. If you'd followed orders, Captain, 200 French civilians would be dead right now, and I would have signed the order that killed them." James said nothing. "My father fought in the First War," Dressler continued. "He told me once that the difference between a good officer and a great officer is knowing when the orders are wrong. Good officers follow orders and sleep fine. Great officers question orders and carry the weight of their choices for the rest of their lives." He turned to James. "You're not under arrest, Captain. You're being recommended for the Silver Star." James stared at him, stunned. "Sir, you destroyed 3 enemy tanks, saved a civilian population, and demonstrated extraordinary moral courage under impossible circumstances. That's not insubordination. That's leadership." The war ended 2 months later. Captain James Bauer returned to Iowa in June 1945, married Elizabeth in a quiet ceremony, and never spoke about Cernay to anyone outside his family. The Silver Star sat in a drawer. The citation mentioned the destroyed tanks, but nothing about disobeying orders. The Army quietly buried that part of the story. James took over his uncle's hardware store and lived a quiet life. But every year on March 12th, he received letters from France, from the priest, from the villagers, from children who'd grown up and had children of their own. They never forgot the American captain who'd risked everything to save them. In 1983, the village of Cernay erected a memorial plaque in the town square. It read, "In memory of Captain James Bauer, U.S. Army, who on March 12, 1945 chose conscience over orders and saved 200 lives. May we never forget that true courage sometimes means saying no." James flew to France for the dedication. He was 63 years old, gray-haired, walking with Elizabeth beside him. The entire village turned out. 3 generations of people who existed because one man had refused to follow orders. The priest, now 94 and barely able to stand, gripped James's hand and said through tears, "You gave us our futures, all of us. Every child born here since 1945 exists because you said no." James Bauer died in 1998, at age 78, surrounded by family in his Iowa home. His obituary in the local paper mentioned his military service but didn't explain the Silver Star. Most people in his town never knew what he'd done, but in Cernay, France, they know. The memorial still stands. Every March 12, the village gathers to remember the day an American tank commander walked alone into their streets and chose humanity over obedience. Here's what they don't teach you about war. Following orders is easy. Questioning them is what takes courage. James Bauer could have called in that artillery strike, leveled Cernay, and no one would have blamed him. He was following orders, doing his job, staying alive, but he didn't. He walked into the unknown, verified the truth with his own eyes, and then put his entire career on the line to protect people he'd never met. That's not heroism, that's something deeper. That's the choice to remain human in a system designed to turn you into a weapon. The hardest part? James never felt like a hero. He carried guilt for every village he didn't save, every order he'd followed before Cernay.